Before we jump into this course, I'd like to start off with a little course overview, kind of give you a roadmap about the topics that we're going to discuss here so you can anticipate what you're going to learn here. I'll tell you, developing a course like this and putting it together, it presents a real challenge in trying to decide what topics do I want to include, to what depth do I want to go. And I always try to place myself in your position. Trust me, I have taken a lot of these certification exams and I've passed most of them. And let's just say I haven't passed a few of them, okay? And it's taken, a second try. But these things can be especially challenging, especially if you don't have hands-on. So that's what I want to really focus on here is getting you hands-on experience and understanding these technologies. So we're going to start the course off and I'm going to talk to you just quick basic information about the SQL Server 2016 certifications that Microsoft has out there. And then we're just going to talk about just some plain old SQL Server basics. The platform itself, all the pieces and parts there. You just need to be familiar where you can grow to from a specialty standpoint once you kind of get your head wrapped around the basic functionalities of SQL Server administration. Trust me, that's plenty to wrap your head around. Then we'll talk about the various editions of SQL Server 2016 that are available. Just plain old database basics, make sure we're all on the same page. Just a couple of things about the basics about the Transact SQL programming language that we use on the SQL Server platform. And then we'll start to really get ready for this course. I'm going to talk to you and take you step by step on how you can download an absolutely free copy of SQL Server 2016, couple of ways to do it. Then we're going to go through the step-by-step guide of installing SQL Server 2016 on your machine, attach the sample database that's provided with this course in the working files folders. And then once we're all set up and working together, we're going to start working through the various aspects of SQL Server. For example, SQL Server security. We'll talk about security at the server level, the database level, and then this new concept just in the last few years of contained databases. And right now in the SQL Server platform, we're working with partially contained databases, and there's more to come in this area, but we'll talk about where we are right now. And then we'll talk about a security functionality new in SQL Server 2016 that's absolute genius. It's dynamic data masking. We'll talk about what the technology is, take a look at an example, get some hands-on with it. Then we'll talk about SQL Server roles. As a database administrator, you will work with these roles, putting various users and groups into these roles, and we're talking about the fixed server roles, those roles that we use at the server level to manage the entire server, the fixed database roles, these individual roles that appear in every single database on the server, and how we use those to manage security. User-defined roles, we'll talk about the serious difference between grant, revoke, and deny when we're dealing with permissions, and then we'll talk about schema-level permissions in SQL Server. After that, we're going to move on to encryption. Encryption is becoming just kind of the go-to solution for securing and protecting our data these days. And the security and encryption functionalities in SQL Server can be just a bit confusing when you try to read through them in kind of the piecemeal attack of documentation. So I'm going to kind of draw this out visually for you. And then we're going to talk about the dark side of encryption. Encryption's not a silver bullet. As a matter of fact, we can even inflict more pain on ourselves than protecting our data is ever going to solve. So you need to be aware of this stuff, and we'll go through that together. We'll talk about the differences between asymmetric and symmetric encryption. You need to understand that. It's foundational to any kind of encryption solution. We'll talk about encrypting your backups, transparent data encryption, the always encrypted feature in SQL Server. And then from there, we'll talk about index management. Now, as a database administrator, one of the things you're going to have to watch and stay on top of is the performance of your SQL Server infrastructure. One of the big pieces of that is going to be managing those indexes. So we're going to talk about the basics of index management. Then we're going to talk about how to identify and repair fragmentation in your indexes. Then we'll touch on the Database Engine Tuning Advisor and its ability to kind of give us a scorecard on how the Query Optimizer views the indexes that we have, and might even let us know about indexes we don't have that it would benefit us to have out there, and even provide us the code to create those. Then we'll finish out this section of the course talking about how to manage column store indexes, a new feature that was introduced just an edition ago in SQL Server. They continue to grow and mature in SQL Server 2016. This is something you really need to get up to speed on, both for the exam and for real life. From there, we'll talk about backing up and restoring data. We'll talk about the importance of a backup plan. Then we'll talk about the various backup types that you can perform, recovery models and how they affect our ability to perform backups and restores. Then we'll talk about that all important transaction log, the basics, how it works, what it does, how we can take advantage of that transaction log and perform backups and restores. We'll talk about restoring databases, performing point in time recoveries, and then we'll close this section out talking about log shipping. Pretty interesting functionality that's been around now for quite a few editions, but it's just a really nice feature. From there, monitoring SQL Server, you're going to have to monitor it. And in today's world, a lot of times there's a lot more than one SQL Server out there that needs to be monitored. So we're going to talk about the basics of monitoring, which is session identification, how important sessions are and being able to identify them. We'll take a look using the activity monitor and some other tools about identifying blocking sessions. We'll actually go out and create an explicit transaction, create a block and show how to deal with it and how to identify it. Then we'll talk about utility control points, the data collector functionality for monitoring remote machines. Then we'll talk about the query store, another new fascinating technology. One of those is like, why didn't we think of this before for identifying and managing and tuning our query plans? You'll like what you see in Query Store. And then we're going to close it out talking about extended events. Now, extended events are the way to move forward in the future with monitoring SQL Server. And so I'm going to take you through a decent amount of understanding what these things are, how to configure them, how to go back in and edit them so you can start to wrap your head around. This is a deep subject. I'm also going to point you to lots of documentation and outside resources as we move through the course. So we're going to cover 8-9 hours at least of information here in this course. So get comfortable and let's jump in and get started.